Welcome to the Ranieri Agency podcast number 3. In this series of podcasts, we're focusing on the state of the consumer electronics industry at the moment. I'm aiming to bring in a series of industry leaders and experts to give us all some clarity and insight into what's really going on at the moment in light of recent events. For this podcast, I'm pleased to welcome Alex Tatham, who is the current MD of Westcoast Distribution, who I'm sure you are aware are one of the UK's largest privately owned companies, with an incredible multi-billion-pound turnover. Westcoast is the UK's premier IT distributor for brands like HP, Microsoft, Lenovo, Apple, and it employs over 1,600 people. So Alex is joining me today to tell us a bit about his role at Westcoast, but also how Westcoast is adjusting its service to accommodate for COVID-19, and hopefully give us some much-needed insight into the industry right now. So welcome, Alex. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, Pietro. Very nice to speak to you and delighted to be able to help.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So Alex, you're the MD of Westcoast. Can you tell me a bit about your career journey to this point, and how did you end up in one of the top jobs in the industry?
Well, it's a lovely story, as all these things are. They tend to be a bit of luck and a bit of hopefully some good skill too. But actually, I started my career off as an accountant, and that's not unusual, because actually you're going to find most of the people running a distribution business these days are accountants. And that's largely because of the enormous amount of numbers and deals and very close and tight margins that we have to operate in. It really is a financial business as opposed to necessarily an IT business. Nevertheless, that's where my background was, and I spent a long time with EY. And then I joined a fantastic business called Ideal Hardware, which was a really innovative and very exciting distributor. And I initially came in to run onto their training division. And sooner or later, I was running sales teams and a commercial director there. And after that, I joined Joe when in about 2007, Westcoast had been going for a long time. And I joined as sales and marketing director then, and I've been the managing director now for the past 6 years.
Cool. Well, in 2007, so I suppose that was just before the last downturn as well.
Indeed. And interestingly enough, I think that the IT industry has a very different recessionary model. It doesn't really follow the same scope as every other business, potentially. Largely, perhaps, if you can go back to the Great Depression in 1932, when a lot of people were laid off, of course, and therefore there was a huge personal depression. But actually, a lot of people and companies invested in machines. And actually, that's still the same today. When you're looking for efficiencies and ability to be able to take cost out of your business, then actually you will make investments in computing.
Yeah, and I think as well, in times of, when people have less money, they tend to buy less of the bigger things, certainly from a personal point of view, like houses and cars and stuff like that. But consumer electronics, still seems to stay, people still buy stuff like headphones and home entertainment gadgets, because obviously they're spending more time at home and they've got,
that has been our experience in the past 2 weeks, Pietro, of course. It has just been explosive in terms of how much business that both Westcoast and our whole industry has done over the past 2 to 3 weeks. And I still think that we've got plenty more to go. Yeah,
actually, one of my questions further on is I do want to touch on whether there's been any winners and losers in this, but let's touch on that in a sec. So I'm sure, like me, the listeners would love for this podcast would love to know what a typical week looks like for you. So when you're the sort of the big boss in the top job, I mean, is it all I don't know, champagne on the golf course, or have you got proper work to do?
Gosh, if only that were true. I actually think that you work pretty hard as a business. Of course, there will be some good moments where you are meeting customers, and actually, for me personally, that's the thing that I like doing most, is going out and seeing customers themselves, making sure that I really understand what their demands are. And actually, I think I'm really much part of that business development cycle that is so important in any business. So I would say that is my first and foremost job, as well as perhaps being a more public face of Westcoast and leading from the front, both publicly and internally, making sure that I'm good communicating across our entire workforce, no matter where they are, and to try and bring everyone with us on a journey that is an astonishing growth story. And as you rightly mentioned, Westcoast last year did about £2.8 billion It's the 21st largest privately owned business in the UK, and is still growing at approximately 10 to 20% per annum.
Yeah, it's amazing that, just touching on the West Coast again, that it's still a privately owned business at that size. I mean, most people, would kind of exit out at that point, but I know Joe is still very much in the business. He still has a desk there, and he's still much in every day, isn't he?
His desk is next to mine, and until recently, of course, he's been in every day. And he likes coming in. He likes to get a feel for the business. And actually, I think that we as a business very much feed off each other in a very open plan situation that we have within the headquarters in Thiel. But actually, all across all our businesses, there isn't an office in the place. We very much thrive on that immediate communication. And I think that's one of the things that makes a privately owned business extremely nimble. And that business agility that we're able to bring to our customers and to all of our suppliers is one of the reasons for Westcoast's great success.
No, great. Well, thank you. So when did the coronavirus hit your radar then? When did you realize that this was as serious as it's going to be now, or it has been?
What's interesting, I'm sure that most people feel at the moment, is that one can't really predict what's going to happen tomorrow, let alone in the future. And if I take myself back 3 weeks ago, when we first started looking at what we might do and how this might affect our business, and it was only 3 weeks ago, then the first thing that we said was, well, we'd like everyone to come in because we want to make sure that we show solidarity with our warehouse staff. And we think, well, there's no reason we should send everyone else home to be able to do that. That changed within a week. And we said, no, we don't want anyone to come in at all because we don't want anyone infecting our warehouse staff. So that was a really interesting change just that week. And at the same time, of course, that I fell ill myself and fell ill with the flu about 2.5 weeks ago. Who knows whether it was the virus or not? I haven't been tested. But nevertheless, I was in bed for 3 days with the temperature. So the thing for me was to make sure that actually the business was leading well and make sure that we were absolutely able to manage at home. And that was the key for us, I think, making sure our IT really worked from home en masse. And of course, we've tested our business continuity plan to its very, very extremes over the past 2.5 weeks. So actually, what I'm really saying is this is probably only 3 weeks ago where we really, really looking at doing something and changing policy. And we started meeting as a board every day at around about that time.
Yeah, I suppose, I mean, now this is probably going to become the norm, at least I would say, for the next, maybe 1 year, 1.5 years, maybe. So in fact, it's probably created a real paradigm shift for businesses now. So everything you're doing now is probably going to carry on.
Well, listen, as I said previously, it's very hard to predict exactly what's going to happen tomorrow, what the policies for the government are going to be, how badly the world is going to be affected by this. But as I said, you've already seen some good news out of China. Effectively, some of the production out of China has already freed up considerably. Goods are on the water and coming across, where, of course, a month ago or so that we were really affected by that shortage of supply. Now, actually, our problem is that the demand is too big for the supply to cope with. And I think there was a real change in dynamism there. But of course, how long is that going to continue? I couldn't possibly say.
Yeah. So just jumping around with my questions here. So you mentioned about product coming into the country now. So is there any restrictions on things coming into the UK? Because I'd heard that the ports were shut and we couldn't actually get anything into the UK.
Well, that's a myth. Yeah. So the first thing to say is goods are coming into the country. There have been some restrictions, and of course there will be some delays. And particularly in the Channel Tunnel, there are some social distancing delays that we're beginning to see. So goods being shipped into, as they normally are, into Rotterdam, cross-docked somewhere beginning with V in the low countries, and then being shipped through the Channel Tunnel by freight. You are seeing some delays there. But again, we're beginning to get round that by some direct deliveries into the UK, some air freight into the UK, and you're beginning to see some of that supply free up a little. A lot of the goods are on the water at the moment, though, so they're not here yet. They're coming, and hopefully they'll manage to fulfil a lot of the back orders that we have. Yeah. Nevertheless, you are seeing some delays, but since there's free stock coming, we're going to manage those pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess from our own point of view, we were worried that because obviously we do the marketing for a lot of consumer electronics brands.
Of course.
If they couldn't get product into Europe, then there's nothing to market until kind of things straighten up. But so obviously that is all myth. So that's good. It's good to hear that it's all coming in.
Yeah, it's coming, and I'm certain that we'll manage the delays as they come. So we'll do the best we can.
Cool.
But nevertheless, you're really seeing the supply chain. It's the demand that is so extraordinary at the moment, and that really has been totally over the top, extraordinary levels of demand. And I got some interesting stats out of Context this morning. So all large distributors, including Westcoast, feed into a database, and Context revealed that actually the overall demand for laptops in the whole of Western Europe is up by 38%. In the UK, it's up by 50%. But interestingly, in Spain and in Italy, it's up by over 80% in each of those two countries. And of course, we are 3 weeks or so behind Italy and Spain in terms of our own coronavirus response. So I think that you're seeing still more demand coming. And of course, one of the great things that Westcoast are doing at the moment is really supporting the NHS. So a lot of the temporary hospitals are all being kitted out by Westcoast at the moment. We're seeing huge demand from the NHS, and we are prioritising all of their orders at the moment.
Yeah, I did see your video actually with, I can't remember, it was an IT channel, but I didn't realise Westcoast have been classified as key workers because
well, they absolutely are, and you can see why now. So there are several really interesting developments. Firstly, of course, is that the supermarkets are absolutely seen as core to the success and keeping everyone going within our country, as they are across the continent as well, by the way. And of course, that is where most people are now getting lots of ink and toner, lots of printers and some of their consumer laptops and a lot of their consumer devices. So perhaps while Dixon's and some of the electronic shops have shut down in terms of their bricks and mortar stores, of course, they're moving to online, but the supermarkets are where a lot of the business is going to pick up. And we are critical to the supermarket supply chain. In most of the supermarkets are supplied by Westcoast. So we've really been a fundamental part of that. And then, of course, it's government year end. Think about all the work that the government are now having to do to manage this extraordinary help that Rishi Sunak, our Chancellor, has given out. A lot of that will require a huge amount of computing. And you're seeing an awful lot of government demand being met, again, by Britain's largest privately owned IT business, which is us.
Yeah. So if, this is a question I didn't put down actually, but if the supermarkets are seeing obviously the demand for laptops and stuff like that, and if shops like Dixon's and all those kind of places are shutting down at the moment from the high street's point of view, is there an opportunity to get some of these consumer electronics products into, grocers?
Well, I don't know whether there is an opportunity, but that's where they're going to be bought. So they're either going to be bought online through Amazon or through the e-tailers, any e-tailer, and you're seeing quite a lot of demand there. But actually, people are going to the supermarkets and they will get products from there. So actually, there is an opportunity to be able to do that. But whether you can get the product set up at this point, well, that's a different story, I think. Yeah. I don't think that supermarkets are looking to introduce a whole range of new products. What they're looking to do is supply the products that they know that their customers most want. And those are products that probably they've already had set up for them.
Yeah, and I guess they're still just trying to manage in their own supply chain at the moment because the shops are still half empty, aren't they? So,
well, it's absolutely critical. But I think that actually the public are getting much more sensible now about how that works, and the supermarkets themselves have got more regulations in place to be able to get this to happen. So actually, I think that that's beginning to normal out.
Yeah, cool. So how do you think for the wider sort of consumer electronics industry, outside the sort of laptops and stuff, how do you think Corona's affected sales in the industry?
Well, we've already seen that there's a real sort of winners and losers, I think, that you mentioned earlier, Pietro. And I think that the winners have clearly been those products that are part of companies' business continuity plans. And of course, those will absolutely revolve around laptops and everything that you need to do to work from home. So webcams, some headsets, new monitors particularly have been particularly popular. Where perhaps you're seeing the negatives are those products that would be more popular in offices, as an example. So large format printers, as an example, large printing businesses, they're going to suffer quite significantly, I anticipate. And we've already seen some sales down there. You're also seeing products in terms of servers and storage. You're also seeing some products slipping there. So in terms of who are doing really well, it really is around the commercial and consumer laptop business. That's gone very well. The desktop business is going very well, particularly into the NHS. And of course, you're seeing vast quantities of ink in particular for all the home printing. Just to give you an interesting example, a French supermarket ordered 32 weeks of ink from us yesterday.
Wow.
32 weeks. Yeah. Now that largely is because, of course, every French citizen has to print out a form every time they go out the house.
Yeah, definitely. So in terms of online sales, so obviously, I mean, all the kind of online e-tailers must be booming at the moment, but is there any in particular which have grown considerably? I mean, Amazon, I know, has prioritized sort of COVID-19 related products.
Yes, they have.
Do you think that's going to kind of tail off soon? Or, I mean, because there must be a point where people have stocked up and then they'll move back to kind of normal product.
Well, I'm anticipating that's the case. But of course, when that's going to be the case, I'm not sure. I certainly think, given those statistics that I've just revealed from Italy and Spain, I think we've still got another good month to go before that changes. However, one can say, how long are these current restrictions going to be in place? If our chief health officer was anything to go by yesterday, she said up to 6 months. So I think that we're going to see quite a lot of change over the course of those 6 months. Nevertheless, I think that we are fighting for every single product at the moment to be able to get it into the appropriate and most dire need in terms of the NHS. That's the key for Westcoast at the moment. And I think going forward, you're going to see some of that consumer product begin to wane as everyone has the products that they require. But actually, people still carry on buying quite a lot of product, and I'm certain that will begin to wane over the course of the summer. But actually, people then might be going back to the office. So again, you're going to get a change in balance.
Yeah. Okay. So what are your big concerns right now with the current situation then? What's the sort of worst case scenario for you?
Well, I think there are, I look at it into sort of three ways. Yeah. What are the short-term concerns? Well, I've already talked about some supply issues in the short term. And of course, the very short term is to make sure that we collect all our cash at the end of the month. And that only is tomorrow, of course, in terms of the timing that we've got going. So it's very, very important that our customers pay us on time. Our suppliers aren't giving us any extended payment at the moment, and everyone is preserving cash, and I understand that. Nevertheless, it is really important that we do that. And a difficulty in perhaps allocating orders at the moment, because the demand is so huge. It's like Black Friday every day at the moment. And you're really seeing this sort of ability to be able to prioritize orders as goods required for the NHS. And these orders are coming in and they are enormous. So it's really difficult to be able to say, yes, you've got stock, because if the NHS place an order on us, then we'll reallocate your stock to the NHS. And I want to be clear to all customers about that. If I look to the medium term, I think our problem there is that we have hundreds of millions of pounds of back order at the moment. How real are all of those back orders, particularly as predicting demand is going to be really difficult, I think, going forward. And the last thing Westcoast and any supply chain business needs is too much stock to be able to manage this. So we're really going to look very carefully at everyone's back orders, and that's something that is exercising us at the moment. And clearly the marketing plans and our ability to be able to continue to ship as effectively as we currently are will really depend on our ability and our warehouse staff's ability to be able to operate in a normal fashion. And of course, we've got to protect those guys because they really are the heroes of Westcoast at the moment. Yeah. And then, of course, if you look at a much longer term approach, well, clearly the mission there is to make sure that firstly, we come out of this as best we possibly can as a business, with all of our staff intact, with all our team intact, and hopefully we're coming out even stronger potentially than we went into it. And clearly that's one of the missions that I and the management team we'll be looking at to make sure we're doing everything we can to improve our situation, improve ourselves against the very tight competition, very tough competition that we have within our marketplace, making sure also that we can business develop all the way through this. But clearly, the key thing is to make sure that we survive really well.
Yeah. So last question then, Alex. So do you have any advice for a brand right now, which maybe, in normal circumstances would be doing really well within Westcoast or any kind of, retailer in the UK? So someone like, I don't know, a smart home producer or an audio product. So at the moment, they're not one of these brands which is, on the front line with the NHS, remote working tool. But they've got a great product, a great proposition. Have you got any advice for them to kind of get through the next 3 to 6 months?
The first thing, I think, is to make sure that you narrow your range, because too much range isn't really what people are looking for. You see that in the supermarket happening all the time at the moment. Narrowing the ranges that you've got. That will preserve and make your manufacturing easier, reduce your cash in stock, reduce your inventory. And clearly the key is to make sure that you've really reduced that. You want to make sure that your goods are available in the supply chain. And I certainly think that the supermarkets are really important to you. So make sure that you are pitching those products to the supermarket, because it's home working. That's where those supermarkets will stay open. If you only look at France as an example, where the lockdown has been much more severe than the UK, it is the supermarkets that are still open all the time. And that is where you're going to buy some of the products that you need and be able to do that. Make sure, of course, that you've got really good marketing through social media, because I think that that's where the marketing is going to be spent. That's where people are spending their time at the moment. They certainly aren't spending time reading emails. There's a lot of work being done at the moment, and I think social media, go find people to be able to promote your products quite significantly. And lastly, perhaps, clearly there are some products that just aren't going to sell at this current situation because they're just not really required. And I think that you need to make sure that your products really fit within the current environment, because if they're required, then people will buy them.
Yeah, okay. Alex, that's some great advice, and I'm sure that hopefully many people watching this podcast will find it very useful. So I know you're a very busy man, and you've got a lot going on at the moment. So I really appreciate you spending this sort of 20 minutes with us just to give your insights into the industry at the moment. And so thank you very much.
Well, Pietro, it's an absolute pleasure. We are a fantastic business, and anything that we can do to help any customers that are watching this particular podcast, any suppliers that are watching this podcast, please don't hesitate to give me or my colleagues a call. We're all over it at the moment and really trying to make sure that we help you and everyone watching. Thank you.
I'll publish your mobile number on my post.
By all means. By all means.
As a joke, by the way. Cool. Thank you very much, and let's stay in touch.